Well, hello there. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Natasha Daniels, and I'm a child therapist, and I specialize in helping parents and kids who have anxiety or OCD. And most of the time I'm doing videos for kids and teenagers and young adults directly on helping them with their anxiety or OCD. But I have been doing a collaboration with the Made of Millions Foundation on their YouTube channel, and I've been doing a series. It'll be a 10-episode series on how to help kids with anxiety. And I thought, why not bring that to you directly on my channel as well? So definitely check out Made of Millions YouTube channel. I have links below, and you can check out all the different series they're doing to support mental health. It's phenomenal. But I also wanted to bring it directly to you, those of you that are watching my channel. So if you're a kid, teen, or young adult, and you're looking at my videos to help you directly, this series isn't for you. So when you see the thumbnail that talks about my series on helping kids with anxiety, just skip it. I will be doing my usual every Thursday video for you. But if you're a parent who's been watching my channel to help your own kids, you're going to enjoy this series. The first episode is very basic, and it's just talking about, does your child have anxiety? How do you find the symptoms? But as the episodes unfold, I'll be building up on that knowledge, and we'll be taking a deeper dive on how to help your anxious kids. For those of you that are watching my channel, it will get more advanced and you'll learn more things as it goes on. This series will be happening every other week, and there are 10 episodes in this series. So click subscribe, click the bell for notifications so you don't miss when I unroll another episode, because they will be every other week on Tuesdays. I look forward to talking to you and helping you navigate the bumpy road of parenting kids with anxiety. And here is the first episode. Hello and welcome to this new series, Survival Tips for Parents Who Are Raising Anxious Kids. My name is Natasha Daniels. I'm a child therapist. I specialize in anxiety and OCD, and I help parents just like you who are raising kids who are anxious. And the purpose of this series is to help you understand anxiety and give you concrete ideas and tips and hacks and anything and everything you can to help and support your child. So I thought we would kick off this series talking about how to spot anxiety, because a lot of times anxiety likes to hide in plain sight. And if we can't see what is or is not anxiety, we're not going to know how to approach it with our kids. And that is actually crucial, because how we approach typical behavior versus how we approach anxiety behavior can be completely different. And we don't want to coddle and accommodate anxiety, but we want to empower our kids, and we want to give them the tools so they can walk through it. So I'm going to talk all about the obvious signs and the not so obvious signs of anxiety so you can spot it. So whether you have a child where you're not sure, do they have anxiety or are they just a typical child? Or you have a child who's diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and you're not sure sometimes what behaviors are their anxiety and what is normal. This is for all of you, because you need to know how to spot it even if you already know that your child has anxiety, and you need to know how to identify it if your child is showing behaviors that might indicate they're having an anxiety issue. So let's get started. So I want to go into the first area that you typically see any kind of mental health issue or any stress really impact, and that's your basic needs, your sleep, your eating, your ability to function. So let's break down what that would look like for an anxious child or teenager. So when it comes to sleep, I almost have never met a child with anxiety or a teen with anxiety that didn't have a history of some sort of sleep issue, or that they're currently going through some sort of sleep issue. So everything I'm going to say today is just for your education. Obviously, this is not medical advice. Seek the guidance of a qualified professional in your neighborhood, but I'm going to be telling you things that might be a red flag. So poor sleep doesn't equal anxiety. Poor eating doesn't equal anxiety. I'm not making direct links or correlations, but what I am doing is I'm showing you, I'm spotlighting some clues, because anxiety gives us clues. It says, hey, look at me. I might be something more than typical behavior. Or hey, look at me. I might be more than just a sleep issue. So I'm going to spotlight these areas, and I want you to know that if your child's having some of these struggles, it doesn't mean they have anxiety. It just means you want to take a closer look. So if your child's having sleep issues, that's a great place to take a closer look. what anxiety looks like around sleep. I'll give you a little synopsis of that. So if your child is having a hard time sleeping on their own, now that will look different for each one of you. This might be a no-brainer for some of you. You might have a child that is up late at night, terrified, calling you back into their room. Did you hear that? What was that noise? You might have a child that has to get up frequently. They need water, they need to go to the bathroom, they want to see what you're doing, and you're just kind of like, come on, just go to sleep. They might be hyperactive at sleep. That one's not as obvious as an anxiety issue, but sometimes that hyperactivity is hyperarousal. So you can see kids get rambunctious and get bouncy and feisty around bedtime. And sometimes, ironically, that's an indication of anxiety. They might be in your bed. They might come in your bed in the middle of the night. They might want to sleep, if they're a teenager especially, anywhere but their room. A lot of anxious kids don't feel safe in their room. They might have certain reasons why that they don't want to admit or talk about. Sometimes there's the closet that bothers them, or the window is bothering them. Normally they keep that to themselves, not always. And they want to sleep somewhere in a more communal setting. So you find these kids on the couches, you find them in the spare bedrooms, anywhere and everywhere other than their room. So you want to look at their sleep issues. Does your child have a hard time falling asleep? Do they have a hard time falling asleep independently? Do they wake up a lot in the middle of the night? And do they have to run into your room? Or you wake up and you find them sleeping somewhere else. Do they need a sibling to sleep with them? Do they need a pet or an animal to sleep with them? Now, some of these things are fine and they're okay. But just because they're okay, let's say you're okay with the dog sleeping with them, that's not a big deal. But if your child is showing panic because they need the dog to sleep with them, it doesn't mean that you're going to fix that by having the dog not sleep with them. But it's, again, a little clue. It's a clue that says, my child might be anxious at night. Now, in this episode, we're not going to dive deep into what you do about all these things. We will in future episodes. But today is just about getting your eyes on anxiety. Hello, anxiety. I see you. I see you everywhere. If you don't know what you're looking at and you don't know what you're looking for, everything else I'm going to be talking about is going to be a moot point because you don't know what is or is not anxiety. So some other subtle things around sleep that I want to mention before we move on to the next one is a lot of times these kids will ask questions that maybe don't seem like an anxiety-related question, but they are anxiety in disguise. So sometimes they'll say, when are you going to sleep? What time are you going to sleep? Are you going to go to bed soon? Can you check on me? Will you check on me before you go to bed, right? And most of the time, because those are very specific questions, those are indicators of possibly anxiety. And the reason why a lot of kids ask those questions is because they don't want to be the last person awake. They want you to guard the door. They want you to check on them because going to sleep is kind of like a mini 8-hour death for people who are anxious. They lose complete control of their surroundings. They don't know what's happening. They're unconscious and anything and everything can happen. And so a lot of times kids worry that they may never wake up. They worry that a bad guy will come in. They have no control. And that is why nighttime, bedtime, and sleep tend to be a huge issue for any child with anxiety. And if you have a child with anxiety and they don't have sleep issues, you just dodged a really good bullet because nobody wants sleep. Sleep issues are the worst because without being able to get a good night's sleep parentally or for your child, everything else starts to crumble and anxiety actually gets bigger because when we're weaker because we haven't slept well or eaten well, then everything else becomes more intense and heightened. So sleep is a big issue. So do you notice any sleep issues with your child? If you want to jot these down, there's going to be 8 of them. That might be a good thing to do as we go forward. And that way you can kind of look at these and say, what areas do I need to maybe take a second look at? Because even if you know your child has anxiety, a lot of times when people come into my practice, they will miss these areas. Now, sleep's an obvious one. We're going to get into some more subtle ones as we move forward. So sleep, let's write that one down. Okay, on to the next one. So another major biological need and function is eating. And a lot of times eating can be a missed sign of anxiety. So I'm going to go into some of the typical things I see with kids who are anxious, who are impacted by their diet and by what they eat. Now, I do want to give a caveat to all of the things I'm talking about and say that I just picked the top 8 things that I see the most often in my practice. That does not mean there are a zillion other things that are signs of anxiety that I'm not including. We can't cover them all. And every child's unique. So your child may not present in the way that I'm describing. These are big generalities, and these are just like big spotlights so that you can find the nuances where your child might fit in. So I just want to point that out before we move on, so that if you're saying, hey, my child has a sleep issue, but it's not like what Natasha said, or my child doesn't have any issues with eating, and so I guess I could check off anxiety. No, you can't. I'm sorry. These are just some pointers. These are just some generalizations and some things that I see that tend to happen. And most of the kids with anxiety don't have all of these issues. They have components. I've worked with parents where they'll say, Natasha, I don't know. I don't think my child has anxiety because, they'll jump off the high dive. They like to do really daring things. They water ski, but they're terrified at night. And I'll say, you don't have to be like a timid, anxious person to have anxiety, right? Everybody has different areas where their anxiety impacts them. So I could be terrified of bad guys, but I could be fine going scuba diving or water skiing or playing with snakes. That's not my fear. Versus another person might be terrified of snakes, or they might be terrified of heights, but they can go to sleep at night. That's not a big deal. So anxiety is a very unique thing, and every child is different in how their anxiety presents itself. So some kids have eating issues, and not all kids, but when they do, they become very picky about what kind of food they have. A lot of anxious kids have a sensory component, so they either have a sensory processing disorder, SPD, or they have some sensory issues and some sensory needs. Not every kid with anxiety has sensory processing disorder, and not every child with sensory processing disorder has anxiety. It doesn't work that way. But what I have noticed is that a lot of anxious kids, a huge amount of anxious kids, do have some sensory things, and that does impact their eating. So they might be very particular about flavor and taste. They might be nervous about a new flavor, a new bump, a new texture popping up in their mouth unexpectedly. And so they are cautious eaters. They might only want the mac and cheese from Annie's, or they might want only the chicken nuggets from McDonald's. They can taste the difference. So if you have a child who is incredibly particular about their food, and maybe they're super, super picky and they have only certain foods they can eat, or they don't want their food touching. If their food is touching and they have mixed flavors going together, they might have a huge meltdown depending on their age. And that is because they don't like the unpredictability of their food. And so that comes back to their anxiety. They want everything controlled. They want everything predictable. They don't want any surprises with texture or taste in their mouth or temperature. That's another one. Now, outside of the sensory issues, there are other issues that revolve around food that I want to touch on. A lot of kids who have anxiety worry about getting sick from their food. And so these are kids who are very particular about, is it cooked? Did it expire? Where did this come from? What's that black spot there? What's that there? They are scrutinizing their food. So if you have a child who's looking at expiration dates, who's asking you, is this okay to eat? You want to pay attention to these clues, because when you have a child who's asking you questions that don't seem typical, I always am taking data with my kids. All 3 of my kids have anxiety and OCD, and I'm taking data. And so when they ask me questions, there's a part of my brain that is filtering it through my anxiety and OCD filter and saying, is that an anxiety or OCD question? Could that be an anxiety question? It's almost happening automatically. And when I get the same questions over and over, or a rendition of the same questions, I start to process that with my child. And so if I'm hearing a lot of questions of, does this look cooked? Can I eat this? Will this make me sick? Or does this look weird? What's this little black dot here? Or why is this blackness here? Or why is this hard and this part soft? I'm going to start to file that away, and I'm going to start looking at maybe some food anxiety. The other thing I want to mention when it comes to food is some kids have a fear of choking. And so this is the last area where I see food being impacted just on a general level. There's a million other things, but these are just the main ones I want to highlight. And so a lot of kids get nervous that they're going to choke on food. So these kids might be cutting up their food in really tiny, tiny pieces, or they want you to cut it up. They might avoid certain foods that they know are choking hazards, such as hot dogs or popcorn. They might over chew. And so you might see these kids taking a very long time to eat because they are chewing and chewing and chewing to make sure they can swallow. Now, sometimes this goes pretty extreme where we have kids who can only eat soft foods and some kids who are only on a liquid diet. There is an anxiety disorder called ARFID, Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And that's kind of a catch-all diagnosis for sensory issues and these other fears that I was talking about that are all impacting a child's ability to eat. So if your child is already on a liquid diet, you know that they have ARFID and hopefully you're already in treatment. But for those of you that are not dealing with severe issues like ARFID, I want you to know that anxiety can impact your child's eating. And I want you to understand how so that you can have open eyes and ears to how your child is interacting with their food. Moving away from eating and sleeping, we want to move into the body. And so a lot of kids will have physical complaints, somatic complaints, and you want to be aware of what those complaints are that can be related to anxiety. So stomach issues are by far the number one thing that I see related to anxiety. You always want to rule out medical conditions, but a lot of times you're not going to find a medical origin, or they might have a medical condition that is either created or exacerbated by anxiety. So I'll briefly cover those. Definitely any GI issue, some gastrointestinal issues. Constipation normally starts in toddlerhood. Constipation is a common anxiety issue. Diarrhea is a common anxiety issue. Nausea is almost like best friends with anxiety. Any stomach upset can be caused by anxiety. And then moving from the stomach, headaches, migraines, frequent stress can cause a lot of those issues. And a lot of the panic symptoms can also be very physical. So dry mouth, a lump in their throat, a heart racing, chest pain, feeling fatigued, feeling dizzy, feeling tired. These can all be caused by anxiety. Not fun at all. I always recommend going to the doctor and ruling out anything else, but then when everything looks good, then you want to look at anxiety as the culprit. So once you have covered sleep and eating and their body, we're on to more of the nitty-gritty stuff. So anxiety will greatly impact your child's ability to function. And normally we see the first cracks in the foundation when it comes to going to school. So sometimes the first indication that there's an anxiety issue is school refusal. It's the first thing I ask in my practice, how's school going? After I cover sleep, because that's normally not going well, I go, how's school going? And if anxiety is really kind of taking its toll on a child, school will be an issue. And a lot of times it's an issue because the child doesn't want to go to school. And it can look like opposition. And some of the reasons why kids are afraid to go to school, because a lot of times parents don't know what the reason is because they are either afraid to separate, they want to be with their parent because their parent makes them feel safe. They're afraid they're going to throw up, and so they're really worried about throwing up in front of people or getting germs and getting sick from other people. They are worried about performance, so they might be worried about taking tests. They might be worried about failing. They might be worried about social anxiety, being put on the spot or being self-conscious or people staring at them. I'm going through a zillion different anxiety themes at a rapid pace so that you can get kind of like a potpourri of what type of anxiety issues cause school refusal. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm just giving you a sample so you can kind of get the gist of all the many things that can cause a child to not want to go to school. And most kids don't have all of those. They normally have one that's really, really holding them back, or two. A lot of times parents will assume the child's being bullied, or they just don't like school, or they're having a mean teacher, and they just can't believe that anxiety could be that debilitating. And it can. So you don't have to have an external reason why you don't want to go to school. If I am so worried and consumed about my anxious thoughts, that's reason enough. Now, along with school refusal, we also see a child who's starting to have an increase in separation anxiety. So a lot of times those two issues, I would say the fear of throw up, separation anxiety, and the refusal to go to school are like, they're a trio. They like to hang out together. That doesn't mean you can't have a child with just one, but I'm just saying they really all like to hang out together. So if you see an uptick in your child needing to be with you, or maybe this has always happened, and if that's the case, this is not going to be like riveting new information for you, But maybe some of you have a child where all of a sudden you're noticing you have a shadow. Wherever you are, your child is there. They're afraid to go upstairs and grab their shoes if no one is up there. Or they're afraid to go take a shower by themselves and they want someone to sit in there. Or they're afraid to go brush their teeth and they want you to be near there. All of a sudden, you're seeing your child need somebody to be near them. They want to go out in the backyard, but they need you to come. That is a clue that your child is having some anxiety issues. It's a clue that you might want to explore. Why were they able to do that before, but they're having a hard time now? Now, of course, we wouldn't ask our kids, why are you having a hard time? What's the matter? And in future episodes, we will go into the best ways to talk to kids so that they're actually going to open up to you, because we don't want to be accusatory. And even if that's not our intention, saying, why won't you do that? It comes across that way. So we want to say, what's the hardest part about, taking a shower? I know it could be scary. What's the hardest part for you? We want to explore that, and we'll go into that in a different episode. But you want to look at your child and their ability to be independent. And if they are wanting you to go with them, and that's a new behavior, you don't want to cross anxiety off your list, because that might be the reason why your child's having a hard time. Another one that is actually completely missed, I think, a big chunk of the time, and this one is actually sad, because when we miss this anxiety symptom, it gets mistreated and it gets approached in a totally wrong way. So anger and opposition are often signs of anxiety. Now, not always. We have kids who are just dysregulated and they don't know how to control their anger, and it has nothing to do with anxiety. But many kids don't want to curl up in a ball and shiver and say, I'm so nervous. No, they don't show their anxiety that way. They show their anxiety by getting irritated and angry and loud and feisty and oppositional, and all those behaviors that are not fun to deal with, right? And the saddest part is when we as parents handle those behaviors as if they're just really nasty behaviors, it grows the anxiety and we see an increase in the behavior. So all those common, typical parental approaches that all those well-wishers have told you to do, your child just needs a tougher hand, or, you just need stronger boundaries and firmer punishments. It won't work if it's anxiety. And so all you're going to do is make your child more anxious and therefore more angry. And who wants that, right? So we want to dive deep and we want to see what just happened. What happened before this big explosion? Is my child anxious about going to do something? Do I see a lot of anger right before school or before bed or before a test or before a soccer tournament? Am I starting to see some indications that they show anger when they're in a stressful situation? A lot of times it's subtle. A lot of times there might have been something that happened during the day that they've been filing away, and they come home and they're just like, and they share it with everybody. So anger is actually a very big sign that something is not right with that child. And if your child has a history of anxiety, or you're starting to see a pattern in when they get really angry, you want to take a second look and think, could this be anxiety? Because if it is anxiety, I'm not going to address that anger through discipline. I'm going to help my child learn how to self-regulate, and I'm going to talk to them and try to get to the core fear that's driving it. And that would be a great new episode, separate episode that we can dive deep into, because I know a lot of people want help with difficult behaviors. So I also want to talk about opposition. Opposition doesn't have to be a ball of anger. It could just be this defiant opposition of, I'm not going to do it. And that also can be anxiety in disguise. So like everything else we've been talking about today, it could be a zillion other things, and it doesn't have to be anxiety. But sometimes anxiety shows up that way. When you have a child that's full of pride and they don't want to verbalize or express or communicate to you that they're feeling anxious, a lot of times they'll just dig their heels in and they just will be like, not going to do it, right? So you might say, come on, we're all going to go out to eat. And maybe you're going to a restaurant that is very triggering for your child. Maybe they're afraid they're going to throw up, or maybe they don't like the smells, or maybe they don't want to see other people there and they're worried their hair doesn't look good and they have social anxiety. It's different for every kid. But if your child is not very communicative and they don't like to talk to you about stuff and they are not in touch with their own anxiety, they might just double down and be like, I don't want to go. And you might say, well, I'm sorry, young lady, but you don't have a choice in the matter. You're going to go. And your child might say, I'm not going to go and you can't make me. I hate my life. And boom, you're like, what is going on? All I want to do is take you out for Chinese. Like, I don't know what's happening. And what you're missing, a lot of the times, what we all miss, is what's building up in your child's head, all the anxiety that's building up. And so then we have to kind of back up and work on communication so that we don't miss those moments where we can not struggle and suffer through that opposition and nastiness, and we can just have a conversation about why the restaurant is upsetting so that we can work through it. Even if we know it's anxiety, that's not going to give them a pass. And so that's not my message for today in this episode, is if it's anxiety, come on, just let them be nice. It's not that at all. It's knowing what your child's triggers are so that you can process it with them, empower them, give them bite-sized challenges so that they can work through it step by step, and give them the tools and skills so they can work through their fears and not avoid their fears. We can't do that if we don't know that it's there. So that is the purpose of understanding why our child is acting that way. The last thing I want to mention is if you have a child who is really liking home, that might be something to take a second look at as well. Because a lot of times kids who are starting to build up their anxiety find that home is safe. Home is home base, right? So as long as I'm here, I'm good, nothing bad will happen to me. And so out there, anything can happen. I might throw up, I might get kidnapped, I might lose you, people might judge me, like whatever my theme is, it's all out there. And not for every kid. A lot of times I'm afraid of my shadow in my house. But if you see your child having some resistance to leaving their house, so going to school is tough, or getting them to go to a restaurant is tough, or getting them to run errands is tough, and it seems like a bigger, more emotional meltdown or opposition than either they've done in the past or what you think is typical for a child, you might want to take a second look at anxiety. Because anxiety says, don't go out there, it's not safe. There are so many things that can happen to you that are going to be very anxiety producing if you leave the house. And so a lot of times parents miss this because they think, well, my child just says they're a homebody, or they're an introvert and they need to recharge, they just need a lot of downtime. And that's okay. I'm an introvert and I need a lot of downtime and I love my home. But if you're starting to see a lot of panic and emotion when you just say, you know what, I just want to air you out, so just come with me to the grocery store, and you're getting a lot of panic, then you want to take a second look and see if that might be anxiety-based. So I hope that gave you a good synopsis of some of the main general areas to look at when you're trying to decide if your child is having anxiety or not in all of these different areas of their life. And as I said before, every child is different. And so your child is going to be different than the next child and the next child. Anxiety shows up in different ways for different kids. So hopefully this gives you some information to file away so that when you're observing your child, maybe for the next week, take some time to just sit back and observe. Don't overanalyze and ask your child a zillion questions and probe to them, because we'll talk about this in another episode, but that is definitely a conversation killer, and we don't want to waste any of our special, magic fairy dust on asking our kids too much information and too many questions where they are going to shut down. We're going to work on communication. That's a very important part of anxiety. But you can quietly observe, play detective, watch your child's behaviors in a new light, since you've learned some new things, hopefully, and see what you may or may not have been missing. I miss things with my kids all the time, and I do this for a living. And that's just because I'm so close to it that sometimes it's hard to get an objective perspective. But when I make a point to say, I'm going to just be quiet, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to just watch this for a minute, or sometimes I get a little nagging voice in my head that says, Natasha, I don't know, that's not a typical reaction. There's something more going on. And I pause and I watch, and sometimes I will then see the anxiety unfold, or I'll respond in a different way, in a way that I wouldn't if it wasn't anxiety. I might say something like, what's the hardest part about that? Or I might say, I know that seems scary to you. And then my child will just crumble and be like, it is, and I don't want to go. And I think, oh my gosh, that was anxiety. So play detective for a week and see how it goes. And I will see you again for the next episode. Take care, and don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do.